Indeed, this was written over 4 decades. And the motivation behind his memoirs was to put in writing events and interactions that were important to me. If events and interactions are set to paper, they are preserved in time. In a sense, they acquire a certain permanence. This was the motivation behind my writing this memoir. Because if you don't put this in paper, then you forget they're gone after you are gone. But if it's on paper and it's properly written, attractively written, then it's preserved. Provided people read it, of course.
Would you say you write for posterity then?
Yes, yes, it's not for posterity for 1,000 years from now, but for the next 20, 30 years. I think this, what I wrote, is relevant. Relevant in the sense that it is interesting historically, but also there is a personal element. It talks about real people and their strengths and weaknesses. For example, there's a chapter on Makarios, who was a very important person, as you know, in the Cyprus, the whole Cyprus conflict now. I tried to describe him as a real person, as I saw him. And he was neither perfect, nor was he terrible. He was a real person with weaknesses and strengths. So from that point of view, I think this is an interesting memoir. It gives you history of the island, and it also talks about real people and tries to bring them to life.
So it's history and value and real people, but why are there any other reasons why somebody should read this book? Somebody from abroad, let's say, who has not such a close connection to Cyprus in the first place?
If he has no interest in the area, of course, it's less interesting than someone who has some interest in the area. And the area is an important area because this is where civilization began, this part of the world, and it involves interactions between various cultures, various civilizations. So from this point of view, it's interesting to anyone who is interested in understanding how different civilizations interacted, and how people were absorbed, and how people who absorbed these previous civilizations changed themselves in the process of absorbing these previous civilizations. For example, Cyprus was originally inhabited by people from the Levant, it seems, several thousand years ago, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. They came here to hunt on the island because it was virgin forested area. Then they settled here. And then the island was colonized. So these are people from Syria, Palestine, present-day Jordan, Lebanon. But then the island was dominated by the Persians, by Babylonians, by the Egyptians. Then Greeks colonized the island, and the Phoenicians also colonized the island. But then all these people interacted with each other and influenced each other. And as it turns out, Greek culture came to dominate. But Greek culture, it absorbed part of the cultures that were here before they became the dominant culture in the island. So it tells us, so in this sense it's of interest to people who have nothing to do with Cyprus, per se.
Can we learn from history? Can these lessons be applied in other countries, in other areas of the planet?
As I mentioned somewhere in the book, Santayana says if we don't know our history, we have to repeat it. So if you don't study your history, if you don't learn, happened in the past, then you are apt to make the same mistakes. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you don't know the history, you may exaggerate. For example, in Cyprus, the Greek Cypriots, I think, in the 1950s, they thought that they didn't take into account as much as they should have the fact that the island was under British control, and Britain was a very powerful empire, and that Turkey, which has 18% of the population of the island were Turkish Cypriots, was just next door. So if they had been more aware of the history, impartially aware of the history of the area before, they would have perhaps been a bit more moderate in their approach to the problems of the island. And some of these problems that we have now would have been avoided. So definitely we can learn from history. I think if we don't learn, if we don't know the history, if we don't take it seriously into account, then we have to suffer.